Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis podcast. I'm Steve Smith along with Andres Barbosa. And today we're going to talk a little bit about this and a little bit about that. Welcome, Andres.
Thank you, Steve.
Pickleball. Before we start with pickleball, let's start with your hat.
My hat is from Johns Hopkins. One of my longtime students played there for 4 years, Nicholas Garcia. I started him when he was 4 years old, and now he's 28. Can you go figure that one out?
John Hopkins is known for a couple things, definitely for the medical education.
Definitely for medicine. He majored in engineering.
Also for lacrosse, I believe.
Lacrosse, I think that was the only Division I sport they have.
Have you been on their campus?
I have been. I went recently with a college teammate of mine. His son is hoping to play there. So I went for Nicholas's graduation, and then I went again a couple months ago.
We have a student who wants to be a brain surgeon. He's going to come back and help me out, but that would be a good school for him to go to. John Hopkins. Let's start with pickleball. This is the weekend. I watched it this afternoon, and you watched it?
I watched it. I enjoyed it a lot.
I enjoyed it. One thing, history. 1965, Congressman Joel Pritchett, that's the beginning of pickleball. His property had an outdoor rundown badminton court. With a friend, they lowered the net. They used ping pong paddles, a wiffle ball. And by 1967, they put the rules together and became an official sport. But they do play, I didn't know this, they play the same dimensions as a badminton court. 20 feet wide, 44 feet long, and 7 feet from the kitchen. I tried to research where the name came from.
I think I heard once that it's the name of someone's pet.
Really?
It could be a little bit of folklore there.
And doing a little homework, there's a card game in a pickle. There's also the pickle in baseball. Right. The runner gets stuck between, like, say, for first base, second base.
Or home and third.
Well, tell us, what do you think of the...
First off, I think John McEnroe would have loved having you explain the rules to him, because he was as clueless as I was. He didn't know that you couldn't stand, that you couldn't touch the kitchen line. You know, I had a little bit of trouble following where they were standing based on the score. So I guess it's not like a tiebreaker where, let's say if it's an even number, they're on the deuce side in a tiebreaker. So, but it was great. I mean, McEnroe was, for me, I loved watching him. I mean, initially when the match started, it seemed like he didn't know what was going on. And I thought Agassi was going to rout him. And then...
Yeah, Agassi got off to a quick start.
McEnroe, once he figured it out how he wanted to play, he just approached up the middle. And but they were exhausted. I mean, they were breathing hard. I think you only have like 10 seconds in between points.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's very fast paced.
I don't know the name of the third commentator, but it was Chris Fowler, ESPN, who's done so much college football and tennis, and then Patrick McEnroe. And then the third person on deck is a commentator who plays the sport. But no, I went to one clinic years ago on how to play and teach pickleball. But I've watched it played, but I mean, at the end, I still would need to know more about the game itself, the rules.
So we were talking about Nicholas earlier. When he started playing tennis, I mean, they must have been 4 or 5 years old. He played with Athena Trio, who now is a huge influencer in the pickleball world. Her wife is, I want to say, one of the top players in the world, Catherine. And, you know, every time I would tune in before on the tennis channel, I would see, you know, Athena on the sideline. It just brought back so many memories. I mean, she started when she was 4. You and I had that common, you had Vicky Duvall and I had Athena. And basically when they were 12, they were 1 and 2 in Florida, both Haitian girls. And, you know, Athena went off to play at Michigan State. That's where she learned how to play pickleball.
Yeah, I worked with Vicky, but I worked with her brother when he was quite young, but I didn't work with Vicky until she was 15 or 16.
But it's just crazy for me to think back, you know, all the years coaching Athena. And then, I mean, she was amazing. She's one of my favorite people. All the girls gravitated to her. She was just a leader at an early age. I mean, yeah, you can see her now. She's coaching men and women. I believe it. If I'm wrong, I apologize. But the little that I was watching of pickleball before on the tennis channel, she was everywhere. And I see her on social media, on Instagram. She's always promoting something, giving some sort of a tactical advice. So it's great to see her. She's awesome. And then I have another one of my former students now is like I don't know if it's the controller right now for the Major League Pickleball, David Grossman. So it's crazy how all the tennis players are now converging onto the pickleball world.
No, pickleball is here to stay. Obviously, I became an official sport in '67. I believe that's the same year that racquetball became an official sport. But no, pickleball, I'd say, I said it over and over again, if you can't beat them, join them. And I think in tennis, I heard Sam Querrey say, I'm sure maybe you saw that.
I did see that part.
Where he said, it's very easy for a good tennis player to become a really good pickleball player. But to become great, there's that 10%, all the nuances and such to learn. A few things on pickleball I have in my notes. Pickleball is to tennis what putt-putt is to golf. It's a few shots they've taken at pickleball. Represents society. We're looking for instant coffee, fast food. Delayed gratification is not a factor. It's a now sport. You can just play, pick up the racket and go. And there's a lot of positives to that.
I mean, look, let's not rip it this weekend. Of all weekends, Steve, let's try to not rip it this weekend. This was a good showcase for them. They got me to watch it. I actually tuned in a little bit late for the tennis because I was, McEnroe had me, I was glued. It was reminding me of like when I was a teenager when McEnroe was at the end of his career. I want to say in '89 he was still 4 in the world, and in 1990 he got to the U.S. Open semis. '91 he had that match with Chang at the Open, and then I think in '92 he was pretty much done, I want to say. But I remember watching on TV and Ilie Nastase just commenting and saying, people asking him, "Wow, we don't see you at the tennis very often." But he was there for every one of McEnroe's matches, and he goes, "When this guy's done, you will never see tennis played like this again." And he was right. He's genius to play tennis, and I was loving watching the guy play pickleball. It was
with McEnroe to sit, either at the north or south end in a stadium up high. That's really how you want to watch McEnroe play. I think Arthur Ashe had the quote that it's a nick here and a cut there, and next thing you know, you're going to bleed to death when you're playing McEnroe, right. Something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, no, there is no positives, no negative, just is. You had me look at that clip. I had seen it earlier where John McEnroe said, pickleball is the tennis, or it's like a 4-man arena football to the NFL. Pickleball to tennis is like 4-man arena football to the NFL. Agassi, he said he loved it. He goes, he wants to go right back out and play again and again, but he said pickleball is where old tennis players go to die.
Well, I found that interesting from Agassi. He said, I'm not going to improve anymore at tennis. So, I can see that. It's something Agassi can play with, it's hard for any tennis player that reached a decent level to go out there and find people to still play with.
No, I've heard people say that before where, it's discouraging because you're just getting worse. They played such high-level tennis. If the biggest word in the dictionary, in watching Roddick play, he knew instantly just to go forward. And, I can remember watching Roddick practice, and he's just screaming out with the F word, "I have no volley." But he was going forward.
Yeah, I thought Chang was pretty good as well. I thought they were both surprisingly good. I thought that match was surprisingly a good level as well. Admittedly, when Roddick and Chang went on, I kind of switched back to the tennis, but then I would switch back for the doubles. And
yeah, so unfortunately, they're both on the same time. The Miami final, I didn't find myself watching just in commercials. I went to the tennis. I watched the pickleball. I don't talk too much about Bill Cosby anymore, but I've read all his books and a lot of great Bill Cosby jokes and lines and such. But he used to say if it was celebrity boxing, people would watch. It was great theater. The fact that it was those 4 former world-class players. It was really interesting when they did put up on the screen how many doubles titles the four of them won combined.
McEnroe was about 77 on his own, but...
yeah, I think he's 77 in singles and 78 in doubles.
So,
And
I mean, what's interesting is what can tennis take from pickleball? You know, that made it popular. You know, one thing that speaking to some friends, it's a lot more fast paced. You know, there's like 10 seconds in between points. You know, so everything is quick. And to me, anybody that says that doubles is boring, you know, I can understand it. Let's say if you get some big servers or teams with poor returns, but when you see high level doubles where you're seeing lob returns and serving and volleying, it's action packed. So it makes you wonder, why can't doubles be packaged in a way that'd be as interesting? Because as good as the Agassi McEnroe singles was, I thought the doubles was better. I don't know what you enjoyed more, but
well, you know, our backyard is 64 acres, a public park that has pickleball. And honestly, that's really, I mean, I've seen such little singles played. So it was really interesting to see the singles because when you know, Joe Public is playing doubles.
and it reminded me of watching the singles pickleball. It's kind of reminded me of like when we were kids, and I'd play one box minis with my friends, where you play all the little touch shots.
Yeah.
It had a little bit of that component, but obviously, I guess the swing volley is a lot bigger of a. You know, McEnroe would come in and would kind of play like he was playing tennis, and then Agassi was hitting swing volleys in his match. So, but
That was a very interesting comment that Patrick made. I remember that like it was yesterday, that it was taboo. Like you didn't teach. It was like against the rules, which was wrong to teach a swing volley. Oh no, you cannot do that. And then when Agassi, he swung at everything. I mean, he didn't play a conventional volley when he first came on.
And Monica Seles. I mean, around the same time,
Yeah.
both of them.
You know, that's where Anacone was a throwback coming out of the Bollettieri camp, where everybody was forehand, and it was definitely the swing volleys. I've been told that that's one of the difficult things about pickleball, because of the kitchen, which is 7 feet from the net. You can't continue with forward momentum. I didn't know until watching today that your racket can't go.
Correct.
It's not, I thought it was just your body.
Your racket couldn't touch, apparently. I think I saw that with Roddick. I think your racket can go over, it just can't touch.
Yeah, I'd have to ask. I mean,
ground.
you know, in tennis, like say,
You can't dig it off the court, basically.
the racket in tennis can go over the net as long as you hit it on your side of the net. So yeah, I'd have to go back and ask some questions on the rules.
But there was just a lot of other, they had side bets, and they had basically, what did Roddick call it when they were trying to peg each other, the pegometer? Or,
Yeah,
that was great. I mean, it's.
No, again, it was great theater. It was a very good show. It did definitely add to it, having those four celebrities play.
Well, and Stefan, it's no longer Stefan. I guess you like Stephanie Graf, but I mean, it was awesome to see her come out on the court, and I mean, she looks like she can still play on tour. I mean,
Yeah, she looks so fit. That's a highlight for anyone. Much better to do it in person. I had a chance to watch her practice so many times because she lived in Boca, I think, for 7 years, and just watched her practice.
I saw her
so many
practice
times.
live in Las Vegas.
Great footwork, unbelievable.
I mean, this is 15 years after she retired, and I watched her practice out there in Vegas. So yeah, she's amazing.
Well, I think certainly it's much better than being on a cell phone. It's much better than playing a computer game. And I do think that what we need to do in tennis is take advantage of all the energy from pickleball, and try to improve tennis through pickleball.
While I was watching, I kept thinking about your complaints about college doubles, about how they play to 6 and it's not divisible by 4. I mean, and obviously it's because you want to shorten the scoring, shorten the match. But there's no reason that you couldn't speed up regular tennis. They don't need to meet up and talk. They can they can make all their communications through singles. They can play points quicker. I mean, with Riley Opelka leading the charge here, trying to get rid of doubles, I think it's, and I'm not one of those. I enjoy watching the doubles. And right now we were watching the women's match, and you had 4 big names there playing in the women's doubles final with Taylor Townsend, Pegula, Goff, and Leylah Fernandez. But how can you package it in a way? Can you make it faster? Can you make it less stressful so the top players are always playing? Can you spread out events to maybe instead of 10 days being 2 weeks so that people play doubles on their off days? There's got to be a way there to, because it is a good product and you just kind of want to eliminate the dead time,
No, with Townsend, she's a player who, I've asked many junior tennis players over the years. Someone from Miami, Raleigh Smith, another Smith, Northwestern, and we were asking him as a kid, tell me what patterns you play. Great fighter, and obviously he took tennis a long ways to be able to play at Northwestern. But yeah, do you play an approach volley? Do you arc a ball? That's a pattern that people are playing more and more, is playing drop shots, but taking a second serve and coming in off of one hand backhand approach shot. But that's something that Townsend is done well, and in her career has played different patterns in singles. And I do think that in watching the singles today, just see Roddick serve and underhand, or you take the return, just go into the net. And if you were to speculate and think of a young Andy Roddick played that way, he would have been a better volleyer.
For sure.
And no, I
don't think he expected to be 6'2" when he was 12 or 14 years old, though.
No, for sure. I mean, even like with Roger Federer, who became such a great all-court player, he was choosing his forehand over his volleys. And, he was asked one time if he could just practice one shot. And Gilbert asked him that. If you just practice one shot for 5 minutes a day, what would you practice? And he picked his strength. He picked his forehand. And with, I mentioned on a podcast that Stevie Longley is trying to add another line and calls it the oven, where you have to wait for the ball to be short so there'd be more ground strokes. So I do think, just like with Ed Krass, who was a guest on our podcast, I guess we go Steve Longley. We could say Eddie Krass. A lot of people call him Fast Eddie, but you draw a line all the way down the middle of the court and you can actually play ghost doubles. I think that was one thing years ago. First time I saw ghost doubles played, one-on-one doubles, as Ed Krass calls it, made it a sport, made it an event, is Bob Hewitt and Fru McMillan is, coming to the net, and McEnroe was a genius at that, is keeping that ball low, capturing the net and forcing the other team to hit up. So it's very good to see the players up at the net dinking the ball. That's where I think, especially kids who grew up indoors, court time is a premium. It's so expensive. And a lot of indoor players, they don't play much mini tennis. But I think that's also gone away too, and there's 1,000 reasons why, but the times have gone away where the parent allows their kid to get on the bike and ride to the tennis courts and just hang out with their buddies and play mini tennis. But mini tennis really helps people with full court tennis. So to see them have the soft hands and keeping the ball below the level of the net.
It's interesting. You were talking about someone like Carlos Alcaraz hitting the second serve return and coming in. One thing that infuriated me for years as a coach was dealing with the kids at tennis, and they'd be like, oh, I want to do the saber. I want to do the saber, as if, coming in off the return is obviously what Federer did was unique. But I mean, I made them go off and watch John McEnroe and how he used to attack every second serve. I mean, there's still video here at the end of his career when he was playing Boris Becker, who was probably considered one of the biggest servers of that era. And every time that Becker would go off and hit a second serve, you'd see McEnroe, 9 feet inside the baseline, just taking early bunting it and getting into the net. So, what you're talking about as far as using tennis for pickleball and this and that, I mean, pretty soon the tennis court is going to be filled with so many lines. You're going to have pickleball lines. You're going to have 60-foot court lines. You're going to have, might be a good time to start learning how to use all the lines on the court for teaching purposes.
Many people complained when the 60-foot lines were put on a tennis court, a different shade of green or different shade of blue. But Braden used to say in a gymnasium, you got badminton, you got volleyball, you got basketball, and people know their sport and they know what their boundaries are, what line is theirs. At the Miami tournament, Mary Jo Fernandez was shown sitting with Tim Henman watching. And years ago, when I had all these lab assistants, I remember Tom Gilly, a very bright guy. That was his assignment at one time. And there was others. If tennis is on TV, record it. And then we had all these VHS clippings of, they would show a fun clip. And, now it's all on YouTube. But I used to have all these short video clips that they would show, but we would have everything recorded. And one was in a squash court, and it was showing Henman with a foam paddle, foam balls, and he was volleying at a really young age. It's so important for people, if they're going to play at the net, to play at the net at a young age. And I remember only seeing that clip one time, and I certainly looked for it in the past. Brian Wilson became a very good player. His resume reads very well because he beat a couple of people playing world team tennis. I think maybe Agassi or Rafter. They're at the twilight of their career, but he was a very good tennis player. He won the NCAA doubles with Rajiv Ram, and he was playing. He was training at our place, playing on clay. And I said, "You need to watch this tape." And we had a tape of McEnroe Lendo '84 French Open. And he said, well, he asked for tape of Tim Henman because he said, well, that's McEnroe. It's so outdated. Because Henman, years later, did well at the French, coming in.
So did Rafter.
Yeah. Sampras.
They all got to the semis.
Yeah.
Edberg took him a step further and got to the final. Yeah,
that's an amazing match between Michael Chang and Edberg, just at the net. With here's a couple other things about pickleball I read, where it's a sport for everybody. And this is interesting. It starts out with fun, not fundamentals. But if people are going to go about it right, even if they don't have tennis in the equation. I know nothing about pickleball, but I've watched a lot of people teaching pickleball, and it just seems like they're making it up as they go along.
Well, in that McAfee interview with McEnroe, McEnroe was saying that orthopedic surgeons are going to be the happiest pickleball fans out there because of the rate of injury. It reminded me of like when CrossFit kind of came into popularity, and you can get trained to be a CrossFit instructor in a weekend or maybe less. And, just watching the points, you could see, just how you have to kind of like bend awkwardly, for an older guy. That I can imagine McEnroe was a little bit awkward there trying to get down and even just picking up the ball. I mean, it's not as easy as like a tennis court that you can just kind of pick it up with your foot and lift it up. So it'll be interesting to see, a few years down the road, as like you say, it's here to stay. If the injuries remain minimal. Now, granted, if it's doubles, maybe it's a lot easier, but the singles look rough for McEnroe there at the end.
Well, one of these places here, and we're speaking to you from Boynton Beach, Florida, and Brandon Flanagan, who you got to know really well now, one of his facilities, or a place where he has a contract, they just converted tennis courts to pickleball courts. And McEnroe was right in that interview. People are coming out where they haven't done anything for years and years, and they've already had where, okay, we've got to, got to call perhaps it's not an outright emergency, but, they're calling the ambulances to usher people off to the hospital.
I know people in Miami that would never play tennis on a hard court, but yet they're rushing over to play pickleball on a hard court. So we'll see. I mean, I enjoyed it. I mean, this was the first time because I have tried to watch it a few times, as I mentioned, because of Athena, but I didn't enjoy it as much before. Maybe there's no names, maybe here in this event, they encourage the personalities, which is, I think, something tennis has to do. I mean, it kind of seems like you try to suppress the personalities out there and trying to make everybody be the same. You should love, hate a Kyrgios. You should love, hate a Medvedev, for being outspoken or whatever.
Yeah.
It's basically, because trying to watch some of the pickleball that I saw, I want to say at the end of 2022, it was kind of dull. There was no back and forth trash talk. There was no, I think maybe done the right way, it could be, now you're going to see with Major League Pickleball, with all these names that are invested with franchises. I mean, it's potentially something that's going to be a lot of fun because now you're going to get, the football player that's used to trash talking, the basketball player that's used to trash talking, and then, you're not going to tell them not to do it. So,
yeah, no, I've heard many people say it's just great to get a racket, whatever kind of racket it is, but get a racket in somebody's hand and get him swinging at a ball.
And then what you've said before in the past is that if you can get people to understand to learn tennis, it'll make their pickleball better. It's a very interesting way to go about it.
In basketball, the kids are always saying, "Can we scrimmage, coach? Can we scrimmage?" And it's like, no. And actually watching college basketball last night, and the Hurley family from New Jersey, and the two sons, the father's in the International Basketball Hall of Fame, and with, it's just basketball. So the father, if you went and just plugged in YouTube, you could hear his speech. I mean, there's a documentary. It's amazing from a coaching standpoint. Bob Hurley, and Bob.
But he was at a high school in New Jersey, right?
In New Jersey, and he's won, 28, 30 state championships. He's been there 50 years, and he keeps the school going with fundraising. And then, his two sons, Bobby and Dan. I believe it's Dan. He's coaching the Connecticut team. They're in the finals on Monday night.
And Bobby's the coach of the Arizona State team.
Arizona State. But yeah, anyway, in the speech, the Hall of Fame speech, he, like so many people, Bob Hurley Sr. talks about John Wooden, and moving our library around with John Wooden. I have quite a few things, books and tapes on John Wooden. But Newsweek magazine with racquetball, and I think it would apply to pickleball, stated years ago, it takes an hour and a half to transfer athletic abilities into racquetball, or I would say same ditto for pickleball, but tennis would be a year and a half. So that's such a steep learning curve to play tennis with. But with McEnroe, I do think that as the afternoon wore on, he really got more and more of a feel about keeping the ball low, forcing the other team to hit up.
But I mean, he's so much fun because you'd see Roddick and Agassi just take shots at him, and he's there defending. And
64 years old.
Exactly.
But he never really stopped playing.
Correct.
Once you stop, or hearing Jim Lair say that, once you stop, you're in trouble. If you could just keep competing. With some of our students, were in Miami the other day, and they had a chance to watch Austin Krajicek play, who's been a guest on our podcast. And he got out to the finals, which was a great run. Missed that point to get another chance to break. Missed that easy volley at the end. But, those things happen. The best tennis players in the world will miss shot after shot. But just, to me, when I watch world-class doubles, makes me think of a goalie in ice hockey. It's amazing, the reflex shots that they make, the reaction, the pickup volleys. And I think that's another thing, too, with pickleball. There's so many times now where you see all four players in. And, you watch junior tennis for a month of Sundays, you're not going to see all four players at the net.
You don't even see it all that often, even in college doubles. So
yeah, now we have that outcry where let's have everybody who coaches tennis have, and then we say juniors, but it could be adults as well. Okay, let's play 15 minutes of one bounce doubles. Many times we do it where you have to let the return go cross court, no poaching off the return. But all four players, if the ball bounces the second time, you lose a point. You can do that in singles. You can play one bounce singles. You can play singles. We do it all the time where serve underhand, and the player on the other side has to automatically play an approach shot. And that's when Roddick started playing today. That's what it looked like. It looked like the drill that we call attack, counterattack. So the person serves underhand, they become the counterattacker. They stay back and they're hitting passing shots and lobs. And then the person who's fed the ball, go feed to the deuce court, feed to the ad court, you serve 4 underhand, you serve 4 underhand, play to 21. And then just, you have to play an approach shot. You can't try to put the ball away in the first shot. And then that player is playing volleys overhead. I do think with pickleball, Steve Longley, the idea of that, he thinks that there could be doubles played where you hit every other ball, like in, what do they call it, ping pong doubles. You have to hit every other ball. But I like the idea where if they had another line where you can't come in until the ball's inside that line, and that would force people to hit some ground strokes. I do think that I didn't understand how it was win by 2, and then the last one was.
Yeah, I guess when you get to 14, you could only win the point on your serve. You could only win the match.
But when they were in the doubles and they had to extend it, that went to 11. I believe it was 11-10.
I don't know if that happened just because it went over the
TV time, maybe?
allotted time. I was wondering that because I was a little lost by that point. I was flipping back and forth, but pickleball did push XFL football to the back seat there.
I do think with celebrities in general, LeBron James, can you imagine him playing pickleball? I mean, I've seen some film of John Isner playing with the game paddle tennis, where you play with a wooden mallet, perforated, punctured tennis ball. One year in Las Vegas, when they had a pro tournament in Vegas, not too many years back.
I was there.
And you saw
2006.
Monfils?
Gael Monfils was playing. So I don't know. It was paddle tennis. I don't know if it was. So I know they're in Miami. There's paddle with enclosed.
Yeah. It's hard to keep track of everything now.
I don't know which one I think this was just paddle tennis.
Yeah, it's called paddle tennis.
And he just went out there. I think he lost first round of the main draw singles, and he just
threw his name in the hat.
They just walked over, and he ended up playing the number 1 guy in the world, and he beat him. And he was just basically just back there running everything down, and I was watching it live. It was incredible. Yeah,
the listeners can go to YouTube and plug in Spec Tennis. We did a little video for them. And Dave Fish from Harvard, the former Harvard coach, we touched upon that with an interview with him, that term bridge sport. If you play with a spec racket, and it's not made of wood, but it's perforated, and they recommend, I believe, to play with a green dot ball. Maybe an orange ball, but I think it's a green dot ball.
Since we've had such a John McEnroe heavy podcast right now, one thing that I remember is that in the early 90s, kind of when Johnny Mac had retired and started going into commentating, one of the big things that he wanted was singles tennis to have one serve, because he thought the sport was getting too fast and you were losing the artistry of the game. So they didn't go to one serve, but they have slowed the conditions down significantly. Where you watch a match like today, where Medvedev is able to stand, back by the back fence. I mean, he's not the first, obviously, but it's just interesting. I had a lot of friends that were big-time racket sports fans this weekend. They were watching tennis and pickleball, and everybody asked me, why is he standing back there? Why is he standing back there? If you go back far enough with tennis, I mean, Bjorn Borg used to do that against McEnroe, which was really tough when McEnroe was coming in constantly. But, Nadal does it. But in this era where a lot of guys don't come forward, you're not punishing him. He's able to stand back there and just get the return.
Yeah, it's really interesting with matchups. I mean, you think of Connors, who stayed so close to the baseline, but Borg was way behind. And when McEnroe came on the scene, and Borg retiring at 26, he didn't hang around long enough to make that adjustment, but McEnroe could really, in that ad court as a lefty, and that's where Borg stood back, way back. With McEnroe, it's just amazing though. He played with a young guy from Sweden, maybe not so young now, Bjorkman.
At the end of his career.
Yeah, I think he was 50. And
No, I think it was,
he might have been 50 years old.
a little less, I think, but late
Close.
40s. But,
yeah, I guess it was Navratilova that might have been 50.
Yeah, Navratilova, when she won with Bob Bryan, was 50.
And, you do see a lot of modified eye now.
Oh, isn't that what we talked about earlier? A lefty-lefty team? There you go. Navratilova and Bob Bryan.
There you go. Yeah, lefty. But McEnroe, the opposing team, was I formation. And, what do? McEnroe just cranked the return right at the person at the net and then just moved in, go body. McEnroe played with, his last Grand Slam was with Michael Stich. And I believe the final, you're our fact checker, you have to look it up. I think it was like
I don't think it was his last slam, though. Maybe the last one he won.
Last one he won, yeah.
In 92 Wimbledon.
And I'm going to guess it was like 18-16 in the fifth or something. But and McEnroe just didn't want to stay back on the return. But he finally had told Steve to stay back because he was like, no, I'm going to get the return cross court. I'm going to get the return cross court.
And that year he got to the semis of singles. So it'd be nice to get back to an era where you can actually get the players to play singles and dubs. Even if it means, and I know the purists will not like the sound of a 3-week slam or something like that, but you're constantly tinkering with innovations, and I'm not a huge fan of shortening the scoring. But, you're starting to see more of these Masters Series events become 10-day events. Will more players play doubles then? And if you can they've already kind of tinkered that with the slams, right? Because they have sometimes a Sunday start. So now it's a 15 days, so is it possible to get back to the days where you get singles players to play doubles? Obviously Kyrgios won the Australian.
Well, the speed of the game has changed. The ball's almost twice as fast. And, and they're playing, and they say they're running on concrete. Basically, most of the courts are asphalt based, but so it's a little bit more cushion than concrete. But yeah, years ago, the top players would play all three events.
Right.
In Delray Beach, how do you pronounce his name? Manarino?
Adrian.
And he's French.
Manarino, yep.
So I guess I was told this, that he was in Delray, and which is obviously February, and then not too much later that they play in the tournament in Miami. Just a few weeks go by. And he was in Delray, and he was complaining that there's just so many people who can just blast serves. And then he's playing Chris Eubanks and had a really good tournament. Coming back to having be one serve, years ago they did that with Gonzalez. We're going to have a one serve tournament because nobody could touch Gonzalez's serve at one point, and he won the tournament easier.
Right. I had heard that before.
Yeah, it's a Braden story, fact. But, I've heard things where, okay, have you, stand further back. I like the idea of what they do in pro baseball is in pro baseball, they're playing with a wooden bat. I think that they need to modify the rackets, which I guess will never happen.
I think that ship has sailed.
But in some ways to bring the tennis back in tennis because it's, boom, boom, and more boom, where there are some players that, because they have such great serves, they're playing lots of tiebreakers. Well, they're winning every other game.
I'm simply talking about doubles right now, right? So, it seems like that's the one sport that the tours are going to use as a means to sort of experiment, right? They're going to experiment with the no ad scoring. They're going to experiment with the Hawkeye when it first came out. They're going to test it out. They're going to test out on-court coaching, or they did that at the junior events. But if you can figure out a way to allow more doubles to be played, where it's not just, we were watching downstairs with the women's doubles. There was a lot of great points. You don't have that as often in the men's because of the speed of the game. But could you change? Could you make it one serve? Obviously you're going to get a lot more breaks, but might be a lot more exciting now. Guys might double fault it, at a snap of a finger. So
here's a question for you. Federer obviously now, this, take the time and be home with his family and not travel. But biggest word in the dictionary, if Federer were to decide, well, I'm going to come back to the tour, I'm just going to play doubles, would he pack stadiums?
For sure. And I don't know if you saw that. It was a very common April Fool's joke on social media. Everybody saying that he was going to come back for one more Wimbledon and playing doubles with Nadal. And everybody, fell for it. But for sure, he would pack this. And honestly, when he would have the Laver Cup, the doubles matches were just as packed as the singles matches. So you just need the star power. You got to be able to figure out a way to bring the big names into the doubles event. They do it randomly, right? Indian Wells, maybe Canada once they first get on the hard court to get some extra reps. But, it's not enough. You don't get to see enough high-level. And I'm not trying to discredit the doubles players out there. We had, obviously, Bopana win the Masters at 43, and then this week we had Santiago Gonzalez win it at 40. So not trying to minimize these guys, but you want to see the stadiums packed, right? You want to see, and unfortunately the average fan only knows 5 names perhaps, right? How can we get those 5-10 names to play doubles as well, right? So if somebody gets out of a tournament earlier, it's eliminated that they can still catch that player in the draw, kind of like what they did with Coco Gauff. She lost relatively early in the singles for her, but she's sure she is in the finals doubles. Don't know the result. I know she won the first set, but
She's, definitely, you got to give her, obviously, her partner credit, but she's putting people in the stands.
for sure,
And she's getting TV time, too. She's a marquee player.
local kid.
With Donald Dell, amazing background. There's times where perhaps he didn't own the tournament, but he was in charge of the tournament and the agent of the 2 players in the finals and doing the play-by-play with Bud Collins in the booth. Amazing background where he was a top junior. Played Laver. Laver's the same age. Beat Laver the first time. Second time plays him at Kalamazoo. Lost to him. Kalamazoo used to be on clay, and Laver decided I'm going to go in on everything. So the first time he played him, a couple weeks later played him again, and he played differently. But
Kalamazoo used to be on clay and allowing foreigners to play the tournament.
yeah. So, but anyway, why this on my mind? We're talking about doubles and the ITF. They have the Grand Slams, but Donald Dell and many people think, boy, did they really mess up with Davis Cup. There's no home and home. It's not the same anymore. The tradition is gone, and okay, something's okay. Don't touch the Grand Slams, but I think there could be experimentation.
I'd love to see the Masters Series events go back to at least 5-set finals, best of 5-set finals. And you couldn't do it because during the clay season, all the events are kind of like congested. But again, if you were to spread out the calendar a little bit more, or maybe, get rid of some tournaments, and basically be able to have, we'll see how it goes now with some of these Masters here. I think Madrid is now a 10-day tournament. I'm not sure if that's the only one that they added this year to be 10 days, along with Indian Wells in Miami. But
I think one thing with a 10-day tournament that comes up related to doubles is the singles players, if they have a higher ranking. So if somebody's 40 in singles and someone's 41 in doubles, the singles player has preference.
Well, those were the ideas that they used to try to get more of the singles players to play. So, but like for instance, today's final, it was done in an hour and 10 minutes. I don't know how long the match was. The second set went relatively quickly. Back in the day, that used to be a best of 5-set final. For I don't know how many years. I can't. The amount of memories that I have of amazing matches out in Crandon Park with Agassi and Sampras in 94, 95, they were, I guess by then it was already best of 3-set final. That tournament used to be best of 5 throughout.
Well, the TV coverage, if like today's final, Medvedev won, center wasn't up to full speed, and he won that relatively easy. Just like a week ago, he lost to Alcaraz in similar fashion. I just think the smorgasbord of tennis is a buffet. Is instead of showing a match that's already been played, a singles match that's already been played, they need to show more doubles. They definitely need to show more doubles. With, but that was a reverse for me today. My mind, I didn't really stop and think it was going to start out one-on-one singles. I thought it would have been just my idea of pickleball is I just see doubles played, doubles. That was a little bit different. Let's talk about the Miami tournament a little bit. Any comments on that?
Well, the semifinal was great between Alcaraz and Sinner.
Great.
The matchups are great. I mean, it really matters, in my opinion, let's say, when you get certain players playing against somebody else, it's a slight contrast of some sort. Obviously Federer and Nadal was always great theater. I wasn't as enthused by Djokovic Murray when those two guys would play. It seemed it was a little bit similar to the styles, and it wasn't as exciting to me. I actually got to watch the semifinal with Medvedev and Khachanov. And it wasn't anywhere near the same level of excitement as the Alcaraz-Sinner match. So,
they're 19 and 21. They're going to be playing.
Yeah, it's
a rivalry will unfold.
And then you've got some other guys like Rune from Denmark. I mean, you've got some other guys that are, again, a guy like Rune who's controversial. Like, he likes to speak his mind. He likes to go out there and a little friction with Wawrinka. But I'm all for it. I mean, it's I just do not like the idea of making every tennis player a choir boy. It's okay to have some variety. It's okay to have some spice. But yeah, if it's and then you've got the Americans coming up. You've got Taylor Fritz. You've got Tommy Paul. You've got Francis Tiafoe. You've got Korda if he gets healthy. You've got you got a lot of names there. So, and not to mention Ben Shelton, who we spoke about the other day. Potentially, that's a nice group of 5-6 guys that can challenge anybody.
I do think that pickleball might bring a little basketball where it could bring a little more trash talking.
I mean, it's
the etiquette with pickleball. The people playing, Joe Public, they're bringing their dogs, they're bringing their music, and it's none of this quiet, please.
Not exactly.
It's got a rock and roll atmosphere. Anything goes.
So, you either adjust or you get left behind. So it's going to be interesting what. And I'm not even comparing it to singles, right? I'm just talking about, let's say, in tennis terms. There's no reason why somebody should think that pickleball doubles is infinitely more exciting than tennis doubles. But I mean, you could, those little things that we talked about, shortening the scoring or shortening the time in between points. I mean, does everybody need to go to a towel every single point? I mean, there's methods I think that you can do it. It's an adjustment, I'm sure. But, for the sake of the sport, if it means survival, might not be a bad idea to try it.
I'll try this. Rybakina.
Better.
Not good, but better. Rybakina and Alcaraz.
There you go. You didn't call him Alvarez this week, so.
Shooting for the Sunshine Double. I mean, what a great week, though, or a great 2 weeks to win one, and then, one gets to the semis.
That was a great first set yesterday with Kvitova and Rybakina. It was
big-time tennis.
I mean, I forgot what the final score was, maybe 15-13 in the first set breaker, but
it was either 16-14 or 14-12.
One of those, but I mean, it was exciting. I mean, it was that was the best final by far.
World-class tennis. I mean, with great ball striking. But, for tennis parents listening, I mean, that's a fantastic week. I mean, to just play that many matches with, I always tell junior tennis players, if you could hang in there and you're around for the end of the tournament. I think if people get to the quarterfinals, Roger Federer's always said that if you get to the quarterfinals, you've had a great tournament. With, what did you think about the match, Sinner and Alcaraz? I thought at first Sinner was going to be the person who cramped. then it flipped a
Yeah,
little bit.
I'm always a little skeptical when I see guys grabbing to their legs and stretching it out, and then magically a drink later, the full body cramp seems to disappear. So, but I mean, again, it's
Ken
part of-
Rosewall was the person who, he would show that he was down and out, and
I get it. I understand the strategy behind it, but it's funny. It's basically Sinner started grabbing at his calf, and then like the next point, Alcaraz fell on his hand and had to get a trainer, and then Sinner didn't have any more problems with his calf after that. So,
I mean, one thing we're talking about the tournament, it's so sad that Djokovic isn't playing. Alcaraz, I mean, he did start hitting return short, and that's something like it doesn't seem that Djokovic is ever hitting a short return.
right.
One thing they hear over and over again is people talking about Coco Gauff's forehand. I mean, I listen to quite a few podcasts, and what are your thoughts on that? You were just watching her play doubles.
I mean, basically, you see her when she's standing there on the return of serve. She's standing there with a forehand grip, so she doesn't have, let's say, a composite grip to weight. But I mean, she is setting up the forehand. I mean, maybe she also knows that people are going to serve to her forehand. So, she's quick, I guess, to change it to a backhand grip from that position. But it seems like her best success has been on very slow courts. Obviously, she got to the finals of the French, where she's got a little bit more time to produce that return. But, she can back up on the return to sort of make it, she has figured out ways to sort of overcome to an extent. I mean, she's, 3 in the world? But it does seem a little bit of a liability but not enough people pressure it either. So, I mean, that's the part that's interesting. I mean, but I see someone like Kvitova and Rybakina. I mean, they're serving 1-teens consistently, and in Kvitova's case, all over the box. I mean,
and very few players on the men's side as well are taking space away. In other words, forcing a player, okay, pass me on this side, pass me on this side. They're not getting that many net appearances.
That was one of my favorite stats that I saw from you mentioned it earlier, the Eubanks-Medvedev match. They were showing where Medvedev returns from, and they were showing the ball location if Eubanks hits both corners on the serve, and Medvedev is covering 28 feet potentially on the return, which, the singles line is 27. So it's almost like I was thinking to myself, I could almost stand on the service line, have him stand back there. He can cover the whole serve. I mean, I couldn't believe in my own head that I couldn't even win a point in that scenario against him. So, but it's just crazy the amount of territory that he's willing to cover because he doesn't believe that anybody's going to come in behind it, or that they can do anything with the volley that he can't hurt them on the pass. So it's an interesting strategy. I mean, it's like it takes someone to be able to, maybe Alcaraz, if he had done it, if they had played in the final, I was dying to see how Medvedev would have made that adjustment, because in the final last week, in the first set, he must have served the volley 8 times in the first set. So, but I was curious to see. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see it. But then Alcaraz and Sinner seemed to pull up a little lame from the 3-hour match that he had to play on Friday night.
I want to talk about Alcaraz's serve, Sinner's serve. But coming back to Gauff's forehand, I maybe say 20 years ago, what became very popular is game-based training. The USTA, for the longest time, governing body of American tennis, it's not learn to play, it's play to learn. And you really need to do both. We call it game-based and form-based. Part of form-based training would be static balance training. A person's in one position, you're tossing balls to them underhand. That's almost extinct now. Game-based training, not to be cynical, critical, but I think a lot of it is just profit-driven. Make it fun. The only business is a repeat business. Have kids love practice. Monday through Friday, they go to a tournament. So they're smiling Monday through Friday, they go to a tournament, and the smiles, the giggles, the laughs go away. But that's where, when you see someone with Gauff's extreme grip on the forehand side, we just call it bad math, the calculation she's going to have. whether it's based on the contact point, based on the length of the hitting zone. And if you were to think about Andy Roddick's volleys, for example, I mean, he was the one.
In pickleball or in tennis?
Both, I guess. But going back to tennis, is he didn't have solid volleys. And he'd be the first person to tell you. He was playing a match, but was picked up on the microphone. Patrick McEnroe is the Davis Cup captain, and he's got one of the best serves in the game at the time. And he plays 5 sets, Davis Cup, hard court. He doesn't serve and volley, but one time. And Patrick goes, they picked it up on the mic, serve, volley, serve and go forward. And he flubbed the volley, and he snaps at McEnroe like, great idea. But just to think of, here's a guy with that type of serve, playing on a hard court, playing a Davis Cup match, and doesn't serve and volley.
Well, I mean, take it a step further than that. You had Federer at the beginning of his career was a serve and volleyer. Junior, when I watched him play the Junior Orange Bowl, he was serving and volleying a lot.
Yeah.
And there was a stretch in his career where he just completely stopped doing it until Edberg got on the coaching team and basically had him reintroduce that tactic just to keep the returner honest. They just couldn't get away with making the return up the middle.
Well, a word that's you're going to find it in the Webster Dictionary, but fortnight. You just don't. We Americans, it's a 2-week period, and the year that he or the match, just the match itself where he beat Sampras. In that match, he came to the net more than he did in, say, 5 consecutive Wimbledons. He just stopped going when they changed the grass. But, I've read so much about Federer is that he just trusted his forehand more than he trusted his volley. A little calculation on both sides on the volley. Such a great athlete. But, do the players at the highest level, do they know the geometry of the court?
Can you explain to the listeners what you mean by calculation on the volley?
Well, the grip determines the angle of the racket face. The angle of the racket face determines the angle of the racket path. The length of the hitting zone, how long the racket tracks out towards the target. Efficiency is the economy of motion, least amount of moving parts, least amount of muscle recruitment. So say, for example, someone has a really strong continental grip. The strings don't even face the court that you're standing on. And, I love to throw this in because people say, okay, now I'll listen, like Jose Garris. The forehand volley is almost a continental grip. And, then you start taking a look at it. In junior tennis, most kids have a strong continental grip on the volley, forehand side, for sure. And then on the serve, they don't have a continental grip. They've got it backwards.
Say it again.
In junior tennis, kids, they don't go to the net. A lot of times they don't even want to warm up at the net, but they've been taught continental. So they have a continental grip on the volley. But when they serve, they don't have a continental grip. They have a composite grip. They just switch that around.
I actually don't see any more. I see people almost have a composite grip on the forehand volley now and have that same composite grip on the backhand volley.
No, Andy Fitzell, we've talked about that's true today, but what people are taught.
Okay, correct.
They're
definitely in my era. That's what it was.
But even today, they're not taught composite. They just continental grip. Right. People will stop looking at our content when they hear that. People have heard it over. You spin the racket 8 times, 360 divided by 8 is 45. Where do you get that 45? That's calculation. That's a math. You can compute that. So that with
another instance where they tune out is when you tell them to hit a 2-handed backhand volley. If you were to watch the women's final right now, and you'd get 2 girls at net and they're just ripping balls at one another, you see lots of 2-handed backhand volleys.
Yeah, we have the clip of Pete Sampras where he's a young kid hitting a 2-handed backhand volley. You have a better chance to develop a 1-handed backhand volley by hitting a 2-handed backhand volley because you can stabilize the racket. Young kids are not strong enough, but they want to be like the pros. And then also too many people are, the people that are teaching tennis, they're watching tennis on TV and they're looking at a tennis magazine. They're looking at the tennis teachers, young tennis teachers. We old tennis teachers, YouTube wasn't around, but and it's like, be like the pros, be like the pros. Well, if you want to be like the pros, you don't watch, they're at the end of the rainbow. You don't copy what the players are doing at the end. What did they do in the beginning to become so good? But someone like a Coco Gauff is someone who's using their left hand on their initial turn, and she could just do hours and hours of training where she's just thinking pushing motion, and then from you turn like a volley, and then just make a circle. Changing a grip is very, very difficult. But if she could just modify it, be able to hit through the court more. And but I think look how great Tiafoe is, and he's getting better and better. It's just like with Taylor Fritz. Are these players, these top Americans, are they going to win a Grand Slam? Are they going to win I should say, are they going to win a major? A Grand Slam is winning all four, but are they going to win a major? And I think that Wayne Ferreira on Tiafoe's backhand volley, for example, he's doing a great job telling him, take the volley back where it came from. Just try to go deep with that volley. And because he's finessing volleys, and if he doesn't put speed on the ball, he's going to be passed. So to work within those limitations. So, but someone like a Coco Gauff, it's just like with Lendl. Tony Roach said, "Well, you're too greedy, and your ego's too big. You've won everything. You want to do better on grass. Play an attacking game all year long. Don't skip the French. Play 2 weeks and say, okay, I'm going to win Wimbledon." He goes, you can't train for 2 weeks to, be a serve volley player. You need to incorporate it into your game the entire year after year. But yeah, she's such an amazing athlete, and just, her backhand could give Coco Gauff. Her backhand could give her forehand a lesson. And why is one so much better than the other? And where is she losing points? And
she's got a great mind. I remember watching her play the Junior Orange Bowl in the 12s at Tropical Park, and I want to say she was 9, just shy of 10 actually, and she got to the semis of the 12s Orange Bowl, and just a great mover, great spirit, great fighting spirit. I'll never forget talking to her grandmother for that entire tournament. She's a lovely person, but yeah, it's you would have thought that a lot of these players would have attempted to tinker with their games during COVID, during the break that they had for, I find it hard to believe that they're ever going to really tinker with that. If they didn't do it during COVID, they're not going to do it now.
Well, during COVID, there was so many people that were doing tennis teaching pros, and they really revealed their knowledge base. This is how we train in a garage. I know you spent time with Victor Lilov. Victor was with us for 5 years. I remember you were with us. You were there during the split sets in the finals, and I said, well, if you win, we're going to give you a hard time. If you lose, you're going to give a hard time. It's all going to be the same. But
I think that was actually the day that Kvitova was stabbed. That if I remember having that conversation with you that day. So
wow,
it's crazy that they all
with but he's a little bit like a folk hero because people study our content. When he was a young kid, they could see him come up, and we have this course, how to train at home. And I think he's 8, and then he's 13, and he's doing the same drills over and over again. But I remember at that time watching Coco Gauff. I remember being at the Eddie Herr, and she played. Get this right. She played maybe flip it. She played. I think she played 12s at the Eddie Herr, and she played 18s at the Orange Bowl, or vice versa. They were
when Victor was 12.
Yeah.
I doubt she played the Orange Bowl.
No, she
at 12.
One of those.
I'm sorry,
one of those
12
two.
and unders.
One of those two tournaments, she's played the same event he did. Maybe it was the Eddie Herr. That was in November. So then in December. But I remember Matt Clore. It'd been many tournaments with Matt. Matt's at the University of Florida now, but he was a national coach at the USDA for a long time, and he spent 15 plus years with us doing this and that. And I remember just going, hey, it was at the Eddie Herr, my memory. So I said, let's go watch Coco Gauff. I remember her dad saying that she would run across glass barefoot, broken glass barefoot to get a ball.
It was a Macy line that he uses a lot.
With I've stole some lines here and there over the years too, thousands. With Coco Gauff, you mentioned your grandmother. I understand both grandparents, both grandmothers were homeschool teachers, but I do think that the serve is an easier shot to change. You're hanging onto the ball. You control everything when you're serving, but when the ball is coming at you. But there's examples of players just doing it. and, not skipping tournaments. You can work on your game and not take time off. It's like, I'm doing it. I'm just making this change.
Well, you see it with Sinner and his serve. I mean, basically, I think I sent you that link of, and I apologize to whoever came up with the, I think it was Tennis Unleashed maybe, on YouTube. And then basically they went through a 10-minute discussion about how, I want to say 2021, and how he's widened his stance, shortened his toss, gotten more rotation, upper body rotation. And they really dissected it. And, last year when he played that epic match with Alcaraz at the U.S. Open, I want to say he was double digits on double faults in that match. So, it's pretty obvious that he was working on transitioning, making that serve more effective while playing. So it's not like he took months off at a time. So basically, fast forward another 7 months and the serve looked a lot more secure here in the Miami Open and in Indian Wells than it did at the U.S. Open when he lost that epic match.
Coming back to application, we have that course, tennis application applied. You take a Coco Gauff, you say, okay, come up to the net, and you're just going to turn and just, okay, your volley, think volley. Now when you go back to the baseline, turn like a volley. Vandermeer used to do this all the time. Instead of talking to people about changing your grip and changing your swing and giving them a dissertation on the nuts and bolts of technique, is, okay, turn and have disguise, like you're set up to hit a drop shot, and then just leave it there, and then as you turn, use the left hand, so she's just not going, she's still going to use an extreme grip. She's going to be over on, bottom part of 3, 4, as far as numbering the bevels of the racket, instead of going way under for 5. You mentioned that you like to listen to Jim Courier. Now, he was saying the other day that he thinks that Alcaraz has like 5 different serves. Just what he can do with the ball, so much variety.
Especially on the ad side, I think he was referring to the ad side.
He's referring to the ad side. And with, but Alcaraz, he has a hitch, and he actually sits down, when he serves. It's a pause. I mean, the knees are not rotating, the hips are not rotating. But with the Milan, I mean, he's obviously sometimes hitting a serve 130 plus, but he clearly doesn't have the weapon that Sinner has behind the serve. And, I think that many, many times in, say, even junior tennis, the better someone becomes, the more exposure they have. Everybody and their brother wants to, the third base coach, the merchant of flesh. Everybody wants to coach the person who's about to score. And, and on the flip side of it, not enough people in the industry have been on the developmental side, where they're just saying, okay, I'm going to take beginners, and then they're going to become advanced beginners, and they're going to become low intermediates, and then an intermediate, advanced intermediate. We're told many times, don't even use those words.
I've told you many times that one of my favorite podcasts that you and Andy did was the one about brain types. So it's interesting to hear you speak about Sinner making this change on his serve over the course of a year and a half or however long it's been. And you look at someone like Shapovalov and how much he struggled to sort of make the change on his serve. When he get his shoulder flare up because he'd be tossing the ball, in his case, too far right. And he has not been able to secure it. And, a guy that you would be great for tennis to have if you were to have success, like legitimate success at slams. It's unfortunate he hasn't been able to.
Dennis Shapovalov. Love to listen to upstate New York boy, Jimmy Arias, Buffalo, New York. He said about Shapovalov, I love how he comes to net. Doesn't know what to do when he gets up there, but he's coming in. His mother, Tessa, she worked for Richard Hernandez. And I think people who listen to our podcast, there's a connection to our podcast. We're not trying to be a magazine. We're, interviewing this world-class player and that world-class coach, and but more of a textbook perhaps. But Dennis's mother worked for Richard from when Dennis was 3 to 13, and Miran Mann, who was on our podcast as well, was a sparring partner for Dennis. And I've had Miran and Richard talk to kids about how hard and how coachable all the pauses of Dennis Shapovalov. But the mother, I've been told that if you go to a tennis school, you're going to see so much of the GreatBase, which is, Vandermeer and Braden and Van Horn and all these different people we refer to as pillars. But it doesn't need to stop. Once you're working on fundamentals, you always work on fundamentals. The pie graph, it's a smaller and smaller piece of the pie, but you always work on fundamentals. Now, he's worked with a number of different coaches. He worked with a coach that I trained as a player. And I really think that Dennis would be so smart of him to connect with Miran Man and just know more about what the racket head does during the hit. Better math. He has calculation. And I think that has gone away from tennis. Like, say, in college tennis, years ago, college coaches, they had a camp. But now I'd say that so many college coaches are totally removed from teaching beginners. And years ago, players would go home, touring pros, they'd go home, and they would hit with, the local players. It just wasn't a matter of like, okay, all these coaches, all these top players are going to congregate and practice with one another. Peter Burwash used to always say that it's so good to practice with someone who can't hit the ball hard. But I do think with center, comment on his serve. He's changed his serve.
Yeah, he lowered his toss. He basically has a little bit of a wider base, to try to use his legs a little bit more. The main thing you could definitely tell is where his upper body coils a little bit more. The toss is lower. When you listen to the Tennis Channel, they made it seem like the only difference that he did was the way he kept his hand up. But it was a little more detailed than that, and they just didn't. The toss was further in front. So they had the racket. I know one thing you've always talked about is how you don't want to have the racket tip pointing to the sky. You want to have it off towards 1 o'clock. So those are all little things that you see in that link. And, obviously maybe during the telecast, I can't go into that much detail, or maybe they don't know. I couldn't tell you, but they kept it pretty generic when discussing his change in adjustment on the serve.
No, that's a good point. The commentators, in all fairness, during the match itself, it's a soundbite. They don't have that much time. But I've said it many times, if you want to really find out what a touring pro knows about forehands and backhands, is get on YouTube, and Tracy Austin is one of the best, is get on YouTube, and a great tennis mind like Mats Wilander, is when he starts doing an explanation of strokes, there's a few bricks missing. That's not his forte. Lendl's very good at that. He said, no, I don't do that. I don't do technique. He certainly, everybody hangs on what he has to say because, just like Wilander, they have such a great tennis mind, but that's not their cup of tea. That's not what they do. But I do think that the top players would be wise to have someone who really had a better handle on tennis math.
Like I mentioned to you before, I love listening to Courier. I feel like he's got a great feel for the match. But there were situations during the tournament that I was, loved looking at the stats as far as mile per hours in a particular matchup. And I'm thinking to myself, there's a lot of variables to that. It's not just a guy hitting balls randomly. And then he was talking about during the center match that the big thing he needed to work on was his drop shot. And then he mentioned the volley. I would have thought that that should have been the other way around. So,
in recent years, I've heard Courier say, "Well, he's not an expert on technique." I know when I train tennis teachers in this college setting, and many of them would say, "I would like to be a commentator," and I said, "That's easy. Just win some majors, you be a commentator." But we used to set up labs where we would film a match in setting like this, where we have microphones and okay, you want to be a TV commentator, let's create a lab where we're going to have a match be played, we'll film it, we'll record you doing the play-by-play, and it's not easy. It's not easy for someone to watch a match and just have continued dialogue.
I think the guy, it was very obvious, I thought, while he was coaching the Davis Cup, how much he helped players mid-match. His eye for recognizing what's going on in the match is phenomenal. And I think he does a great job of relaying that to the viewer. And I think Isner beat Federer in Davis Cup with Courier on the bench, and I'm sure he's had other.
I believe that was a very big mistake by the Swiss. I believe it was on bad clay in the mountains, high altitude in Switzerland. That was not a smart
But then in general,
choice.
like you see, like Eubanks apparently, like now he was. Again, Courier was quick to not take any credit for it, but I mean, he spent 3-4 days with Courier. So I mean, the guy, I think his mind is for recognizing scenarios, and I know a mutual friend of ours, Francisco Montana, they go way back to the juniors, but I know I've spoken to Kiko about it, that he just loves listening to Courier talk about a match.
I think one thing that's important point to make too, though, is that I think parents and tennis teachers, it's amazing how much respect, rightfully so, Courier, number one in the world. Okay, I'm going to listen to this guy. He's definitely earned his stripes. And that's, I use that line. I spent my life saying the right things to the wrong people. It's that, people, junior tennis players, for the most part, you give them advice and they don't follow it. They don't follow it to the T. And then, they get lessoned out, they get programmed out. And great kids treat tennis teachers like they treat their parents. And the parents, how many times, okay, put your dirty clothes in the hamper, turn off the lights, and just over and over again, they're just told the same thing. And, that term white noise is that, they might hear you, but it's not registering. But I do think that the moment as well. I know my son Connor played for Ohio State. There's I just think of different examples where, so Ty Tucker calls me over and has me tell Connor what to do, and in those moments they're going to listen. I think that's a point for the parents listening, is that juniors, they're looking for advice when it's 3-all in the third, and they're in that panic mode. But in Milan, it's very interesting that in that situation, the juices are flowing and people are producing more myelin. I think of training a player to go forward for 3 months, and then they go to a series of 2-3 tournaments and they don't go forward. They produce more myelin during those, not the 3 months preparing for those tournaments, but the 3 weeks. So it's really interesting. Now, I do think that, coming back to the brain typing, that's a big benefit of an ISTP. Sinner is one chilled guy. Where I think that Alcaraz is an ESTP. I was flattered by Vic Braden telling me towards the end of his life, he says, Steve, and for him to say to me, he goes, Steve, we blew at you, and I should have been teaching ISTPs and ESTPs. I do think that Elena
Rybakina,
I think she's an ISTP. It's amazing how many top tennis players are ISTPs. Yeah, the listeners could go back and I think get a lot out of that podcast. But I do think when you go back to the drawing board, if you evaluate, Alcaraz he beat Sinner in California, but he lost to him in Florida. Sunshine double. Is like, I have to hit a bigger serve. As great as he is, you can't rest on your laurels. As big as he is, as great as he is, I think the camp needs to go, okay, what do we need to do to improve that serve?
Be interesting to see if that actually happens.
But overall, if you were to think about, he has better math than Sinner. Sinner could be a little bit higher, longer on the backhand, be a little bit more vertical on the backhand. Forehand side, it's a big problem in tennis now that, all you have to do is watch someone shadow swing, and that you want to be really loose, but don't force wrist play. It's going to be there when you swing really, really fast as a right-hander. You're going to be releasing the racket to the left, but don't force it. And that's what people are being taught. They're being taught lag, snap, roll, the windshield wiper, margin, the doorknob.
Margin, shape, all the keywords that we were talking about the other day.
Talk a little bit about Medvedev. What comes to your mind when you think of Medvedev? He just won Miami.
So one of my close friends, on my drive up here was telling me how, what's the right word I should put here? How not elegant Medvedev is. And basically, I'm thinking to myself, I mean, I can see why you say that, but the guy's serve is beautiful in my opinion. But I mean, just in the history of tennis, you've always had players that had strokes that are not, maybe aesthetically pleasing. I went back and I mentioned to him as far as, I'm sure when Rafa Nadal came out on tour, you weren't a fan of, the finish on the forehand. I'm sure if you were to go back even further, you weren't a fan of the Jimmy Connors forehand. I'm sure you weren't a fan of the John McEnroe ground strokes. If you weren't a fan of the Bjorn Borg backhand, or you weren't a fan of the Vilas serve, So again, it's what I wanted to see was how Medvedev was going to problem solve if he played Alcaraz, and Alcaraz executed a similar strategy that he did in Indian Wells as far as coming in, right? But I mean, if you're Medvedev, first of all, I mean, how fast is that guy? 6'6". I mean, just literally covers court like no one I've ever seen. And then, but I mean, it's not like you're playing a Sampras. It's not like you're playing a Federer that's going to be serving you and trying to get in. There's no reason why he shouldn't stand back, right? Like, if someone's able to pose him a problem, let's see if he adjusts. I'm looking forward to the matchup when he actually has to make that adjustment. And it's funny that you were talking about Francis Tiafoe. I saw that match that they played at Indian Wells, and that was the most I'd ever seen Tiafoe come into the net. Last year in Canada, I think Kyrgios in that match in Canada served and volleyed the entire match. The entire match he served and volleyed against Medvedev, whereas at the U.S. Open, he didn't do it anywhere near as much. And I think it kind of had Medvedev a little bit flustered, and he ended up losing both of those matches to Kyrgios.
With, you just mentioned quite a few players. A friend of mine from 100 years ago, Vitek Miras, he's a great Polish player, and he was not really allowed to travel. And he's from the same age group as Jimmy Connors. Vitek, he went by both. A lot of times we Americans can't get the name right. But I remember being at the Orange Bowl with him, and the guy speaks 5-6 languages. And this was when Poland fell to martial law. And I remember being in the hotel room with Vitek and his players, and he was the only one who went home. All the players stayed. Basically political asylum. And I remember the knock on the door. I opened the door, and it's ABC Evening News, Miami Hotel right by Flamingo Park. And he had a great line. And he said, they asked him, "Are you going home?" And he said, "Well, when the ship's going down, the rats are the first ones to leave." And that was back in the day when I remember he won the lottery, and he was going to get a car 8 years later. So, why I mention that is that I remember going, "Hey, let's walk around the Orange Bowl," and all these coaches coaching in different languages. And I remember just practicing to be, have the look where you're very unassuming and you're talking and they don't even think that you're listening to every word they're saying. And it was amazing, what are they saying? What are they saying? He goes, "Oh, they say the same thing." One myth to the next myth. It's the same in every language. With, here's like, I can't think of, it'll come to me, but I remember I watched Segura work with Connors. I watched Berglund work with Borg. I watched Tiriac work with Vilas. I watched Vitas Gerulaitis work with 3 different coaches. I mean, I just took the role of the tennis bum where I tell young people learning to teach tennis, I said, no, get a job working nights. Don't teach tennis, at least for the first 3 years. Put yourself in a position where you can just study tennis. And, and continue to do that. But it was Warren Woodcock, Fred Stolle, and Ian Crookenden. And I remember Ian Crookenden, it was at the Boca Hotel, working with Gerulaitis on having his racket go further back on the serve. And that summer, it was a famous match, I think it was 77, where he played Borg in the semis. And that was just part of his ritual. He'd bounce the ball, he'd put the racket back here, and then he would serve. But with those what was it? It was Tony, the Mexican player.
Palafox?
Palafox, good. You win the contest.
It's another McEnroe. Didn't he work with McEnroe as well?
Yeah,
I think McEnroe even patterned his game a little bit after.
Chris Garner has been really successful in college. He coached Amherst, I think, for 5 years. They were in the Division III final, maybe 3 out of 5 times. He was a very good tennis player, and he brought his young kids to me like 3 different times. And it was circumstantial that I think it was his wife had relatives that lived right next to where we were working. But, I remember I never really saw Tony Palafox play, but he said that, he was around Palafox, and McEnroe's game looks so much like Palafox's. It's very kind of interesting where it comes from. But no, you're right. I mean, I watched McEnroe, and I'm 4 years older than him, so I watched him play in the Orange Bowl and thinking, hey, he doesn't hit his ground strokes very big. And then that summer was when he got to the semis of Wimbledon. But when by 77, Braden's book came out. I was just, so new to the game. But, like say I was in that Boca Raton area for years, and I used to think, well, I knew for sure I didn't know that 2 plus 2. I didn't know from a tennis standpoint what 2 plus 2 ended up being, but I didn't know that I was surrounded by all these people in tennis that, and I think that exists to this day. 2 plus 2, does it really add up on the nuts and bolts side of tennis? Braden, I always tell people, May 10th, 1976, featured article in Sports Illustrated, and the title was "Tennis is in the Stone Ages." In a lot of ways, it still is.
4 days before I was born, or 4 days after I was born.
That's just a go-to for me. And again, for our listeners with all these podcasts we have now, if they went back and listened to Getting Aerial.
That was a great one.
And, biomechanist, and how they both helped each other out so much, Braden and Getting Aerial. But the thing about Vic is that his presentation was so strong. He's like a professional comedian. I think that book should be written that Vic Braden is missed, but Vic Braden was missed. And that the nuts and bolts, it still it doesn't add up. I mean, but when you look at Alcaraz play or Elena Rybakina, those two, are very well taught. Coming back to Medvedev, you mentioned that. That's where people need to read about the character of tennis. He almost looks like he's going to fall over. He's got a commercial where he's coming down these stairs.
Yeah, he made it like a video game.
And he doesn't look like he's...
No, he did it I think it's on purpose.
On purpose, okay. But he does look gangly. But if you read that, he was just told over and over again, you're not going to be that good. And no one, for the most part, his parents did, and he did, and then the coach he's had in his corner for a long time now, they believed in him. And, that's the number one thing in tennis is the inner belief system. But, he first came on the scene. This guy, but he's really refreshing to listen to. Like, my volleys are lousy.
He's a
great interview.
Guy, English is his third language, and he's hilarious. It's basically...
He's so honest. He's to the point.
So you were mentioning Getting Aerial. Again, I don't know where I heard this podcast, so whoever did it, I apologize. But they were interviewing Roscoe Tanner, and I remember the famous... I saw it on YouTube, but I'm sure it was... I don't know if it was on ABC back in the day or PBS, but talking about the serve. And then in this podcast that I listened to, he was talking about how he learned how to serve in the forest. And basically how his coach would take him out in the back and they'd find a certain tree, and then he had to do the service motion and hit the leaf over and over and over again.
Yeah, the Lookout Mountain, Tennessee, where you could pick the leaf right. And that comes from Gonzalez, too.
And then once he mastered the ability to hit that leaf over and over, now he had to toss the ball to hit that leaf and then combine the two together. And I thought that was brilliant. And having seen the video of Getting Aerial on the force plate, and I really hit home that podcast.
Clarence Mabry, what a great personality, the late Clarence Mabry. He wrote the book, John Newcomb Family Tennis Book. And he was the coach at Trinity when they were Division I, and they were big time, big time. Chuck McKinley, he won Wimbledon. I mean, they had some great tennis players at Trinity. And Clarence Mabry, like a great comedian, he could make fun of himself. And he said, I had Roscoe Tanner in for a visit, but he goes, I just thought that serve was so funny looking. And I didn't push all the buttons to try to get him to go to Trinity. Because he did have the low toss out to the right. But Braden is the one who, he hit it at the apex.
Low toss out to the left.
Out to the left, yeah. With, which helped out a little bit. But Medvedev, I think it happened before our eyes. He was playing Djokovic, and Djokovic was teeing off on his second serve. And from that point, he goes, okay, I'm just going to hit 2 first serves.
Exactly. I mean,
and that comes from Laver. Laver, well, I don't differentiate that much between my first serve and second serve. I can't get 1 out of 2, and I don't deserve to win the point anyway.
So, I mean, I think in this match, you might have had 6 double faults. I think in the semi, he probably had maybe more than that. I'm assuming more than that. And then in the quarters, and they kept referencing in the telecast, that he's having trouble with his second serve. He's double faulting, and what's his points won on second serve? Just give me that number, because honestly, the double fault itself, it's kind of irrelevant because he's winning a lot of points when he does make the second serve in.
I don't know the stat, but it's.
I was asking in my own head, the
in your
commentator.
Oh, okay.
During the earlier matches, because they were making it seem like his second serve was a huge problem. I'm like, this guy, if he wanted to kick it in, he'd kick it in. But I mean, he's really trying to be uber aggressive on the second, kind of like Sampras used to be with his second serve. And you mentioned Laver, the same thing.
With Alcaraz, that's something that really hurt him against center, and not the California match, not Indian Wells, but here in Miami, his service percentage fell way off. And then those are 2 stats to really look at. I mean, and center was doing much better, winning points on second serves. Second serve, what percentage was he winning when he was returning a second serve? But Medvedev, he's going into the clay court season now, and he goes, well, I'm not very good on clay. But then he goes, well, I got to the quarters of this, and I got to semi steps. But then he goes, but I'm going to show up, and I'm going to do everything I can to win. I mean, again, with junior tennis players, I guess sometimes you don't know if they go off and they're looking at it on their phone, but I think because they're saturated, they're so exposed, they have so much access to watching top tennis, listening to top tennis players, I think they're almost oblivious to it. I mean, years ago, because, I remember when in the U.S., when I first got into tennis, you would watch the Wimbledon final tape delayed. You didn't get it live. And you're just thirsty, just hanging in there for any little tidbit. And I think, unfortunately, because now it's right there on a silver platter, I don't think that the kids are hungry for tennis knowledge.
It's true. I remember how growing up, how a lot of the matches that I used to watch, I think the women's final at Roland Garros for a long time when I was growing up was on tape delay. I don't think it started.
Yeah, I remember that being a little sexist, a little chauvinistic, because then the men were live and the women weren't. And, let's do this for a second. The junior tennis, education or service? What do you think most junior programs are based on? Are they education-based or service-based?
No, they're service-based. I mean, it's any industry where you can get a high school kid or a college kid with minimal experience teaching, and then you can throw them out there on a court for a summer camp program or a spring break program. And basically, you're just providing a service. And, the kids...
That's a great answer.
We'll see someone that's, their age or a little bit older, but someone they can look up to. They, maybe talk more in line, and what they don't know as far as the nuts and bolts, they make up for it in personality and fun and this and that. So for sure, it's 100. I mean, not 100%, but it's very heavily service based.
I tell junior tennis players, goal-oriented junior tennis players, don't work in tennis. Get your hands dirty, go rake leaves, go wash dishes, go pull weeds. But they do get hired because they know tennis.
They can hit a ball.
And they have the personality charisma. But with that being said, though, even though the industry is very much service-based, it's not downgrading, belittling the people that are on that side of it. They're working hard, under the hot sun. And
Yeah, and maybe that's what's needed as far as, a lot of kids are not going to be able to handle a lot of education, but that doesn't mean that you can't sprinkle it in little doses, So I know for as far as our program, I'm usually pretty well aware of the kids that are goal oriented or that are capable of actually extended information. I'm aware of that. And I'm also aware of the kids that are going to short shelf life that are only capable of 15, 20 minutes. And then, I move them in and out. So, everybody's got to be able to do their own. In your case, you've got people that travel all over to come here to, spend all day talking, playing, viewing tennis. That is that it has to be built. You have to build to get to that level. So maybe a lot of these young kids that are out there teaching in the summers, that might be the impetus that a lot of these young kids get is by being inspired by someone, 5, 6 years older. But at some point, the education is needed because at some point it'll be too late. You're not going to be willing to go off and make that change.
In our world, we define teaching as, information transfer. Coaching is a human relationship. And, ideally, one can do both. They can teach the X's and O's and the nuts and bolts, but then they have the ability to communicate, inspire, motivate. But the tennis industry, in junior tennis, what percentage of people teaching tennis are developers and what percentage of people teaching tennis are recruiters?
That's I couldn't tell you. I can...
Just a ballpark, 70-30, 60-40.
90-10.
90-10, recruiters.
So recruiters. And again, this is probably the problem that tennis has had in relation to pickleball, is that once upon a time, everybody wanted to play tennis. And maybe a lot of these pickleball players are people who failed at tennis. So there wasn't enough instruction, potentially, for some of these people. And then their game stagnated, didn't get any better. It wasn't fun anymore. And now they're able to just transition into pickleball with like you say, in an hour and a half. You basically understand the nuts and bolts, and any athlete can kind of go in there and play. So, tennis probably did a little bit of a disservice. Again, I know the USTA tried really hard as far as to get large numbers of kids playing tennis. So, I understood the game-based idea behind it. But, they made it seem like the other one couldn't work. And they could have easily have gone... Both methods could have easily worked side by side, and let the public decide which way they want to go.
Well, certainly, people who listen to our podcast know that I'm not in favor of the so-called tennis coach who's at the tournament handing out business cards with the kids who can already play. We have to bring new people into the game, and it's amazing how many people, tennis teaching pros, that want to stay away from beginners. Because it's quite difficult to start with beginners.
So, I've spent a lot of time driving up here, so I get randomly caught listening to different podcasts preparing for this one. I heard another one with Lindsay Davenport this week, and she was talking about how the influence that Robert Lansdorp had on her life and how he wasn't for everybody. But with, I think she's got 4 kids. And she mentioned how it's a prerequisite for her that anybody, I think it was like volleyball, tennis, and basketball, that it be very technically based early on. Because she's big believer that if the slight little error and everything's going to fall apart. So it was interesting to listen to her, and she would go back and talk about her junior days and how Lansdorp would talk about hitting 1,500 balls in a lesson and how many returns she practiced and how she would literally view the court in terms of down the line, let's say on the deuce court, down the line return, middle, cross court, and short cross court. And she was talking about how she could never really hit down the line. And how she just adjusted between the other three, but just the amount of detail that she was talking about in that podcast about her mechanics and the part that I kind of found interesting is she made it seem like it's much different today, as if the physics has changed. And she was like, in today's game, the grips, the strings, this and that. So
I think if tennis families do their homework, they need to do their homework. They can climb the ladder. I mean, Lindsay Davenport, her son is upcoming and he's doing really, really well. One of her buddies, Mary Jo Fernandez, her son is doing really, really well.
At Stanford.
Yeah. And then it just goes on and on. Taylor Fritz. I mean, my mother was like top 10 in the world. And then the father and the uncle, tennis teaching pros with playing backgrounds. And so they're really born into tennis.
How about the Frenchman who got to the finals of the Dubs, or who won the Dubs?
Yeah.
Gonzalez. I asked you if you were familiar with the father back in the day.
Yeah, I remember seeing his dad play. But but with that, it's like, these people are born into it, and they're hitting balls when they're still in diapers. With Lansdorp, he's Dutch, but he grew up in Indonesia. And, you could read his story where, he fled from gunfire. Civil unrest and this and that. And he was very successful in San Diego as a coach, but then he came up, to the Orange County, well, actually L.A. area, basically, the Kramer Club, and he took over for Braden. And I remember one time running a class, a weekend workshop, and Elliot Telscher, who's not a very big guy, he's about my size, but he was an amazing tennis player, top 10 player in the world, and he sat in half the workshop, and I said, "Hey, tell me when I'm wrong. I wasn't there." But he had worked with, Braden in the early phases, and then he worked with Lansdorp. And I remember saying to him, "Lansdorp gave you such a hard time." He goes, "He still does." But I made the arrangements where when I was working for Braden, and I was, refusing to be on the staff when they finally said, "No, you have to work on the staff." But I was supporting myself. I had cheap rent. I was living in a van. And, I lived in a van, but I say it's pretty nice places. Costa de Casa is a pretty nice place. And when Vic would leave, I would leave. He would go off in speaking engagement, and I would go around Southern California. So I just remember How to Slay the Dragon. I did this with Bollettieri. People have heard me say this before. So I go to this club in L.A., and I want to watch Lansdorp teach tennis. And there's a turnstile, so I had to pay. They asked me, I was there to see Robert. They paged him from the court. So here he comes from the court. He sounds like Rocky Balboa. He doesn't know me from Adam. "Yeah, who are you?" And he had done some work with Tim Gullickson, who I knew. And I said, "Well, Tim Gullickson, a mutual friend of ours, told me that you're the best tennis teacher in the world. If I ever had a chance to watch you work, I should try to make that happen." And it's like, I just had an open, and I could come and go anytime I wanted. I would just stay in the background. And I remember Elliot Telscher saying, "What are you doing?" So I'm just watching him teach. I remember him saying, he was a young guy, like in his early 20s, like I was at the time. So that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. And at one time, he was in charge of USTA tennis. Yep. Well, Jean Austen, and I believe it was John, one of her kids, one of her boys, and went to the lesson to take notes. She ran the pro shop. And she's an ENTJ, and she used to pay her kids like 10 cents an hour to practice, and she set up all these matches. And Vic had a players' lounge for these kids at the Kramer Club. It's just amazing what was going on. And Vic used to have a sandwich where he couldn't see anybody hit balls because he couldn't stop coaching. I can remember I was a hitting partner, Vic's coaching. I'm a hitting partner with Tim Gullickson, and Mars Luders is like 3 courts down, who became a really good college tennis player along with his brother. And next thing you know, he's left Tim Gullickson, and he's 3 courts down telling this young Mars Luders how to hit the ball better. But so anyway, Gene goes out on the court to take notes, and Robert doesn't say one word the entire hour, just feeds him balls. And then she said, well, you didn't say anything to him during the lesson. Like, do I have to pay for this lesson? There was no lesson. He goes, no, that was the lesson. He didn't listen to me the last time. So this lesson, I didn't say anything to him. That was a lesson. And he starts, if he listens to me, I'll talk to him during the next lesson. And, those kind of tennis teachers have just gone away, where we have a clip that's from, he used to do this Lansdorp 20. The way he fed the ball, Hopman fed the ball that way. Just cranked the ball. And side to side, you could go down line, cross court, you get sliced, top, it didn't matter, but you had to hit the ball deep. And, you had to tee off on it. There's no pushing it back and forth. And the lesson wasn't over until you got 20 in a row. You stop at 3, and you start again at 0, and you get 5 deep, and then you start again at 0. And but I think, late Bob Brett, he was a student of Hopman's, and I have so much film of him teaching Canadian kids that I worked with. And there's just so many reps. But I think that also, too, is that a Lansdorp or a Brett, it's a little bit different when they start to get interviewed and they say, well, how do you coach? And, it's not like they're not going to Bradenize it. They're not going to bring that classroom portion to it where they just have all this rationale. This was why, this is why, this is why. But, Lansdorp taught such clean swings and take the ball early, be close to the baseline, and look for the first ball to transition on. And, he just taught a complete game. And I think also that Lansdorp was a little bit like the people. I know that I've met a few people who had a chance to work with Charlie Hollis, who coached Laver. And it was like, if you're fat, you're fat. This would just tell, some poor young girl, poor young boy, they're chubby and they need to drop a few pounds. I mean, you just boom, just tell them. And I don't think that type of coaching takes place so much anymore. With tennis talk, you think we're making any sense? Think anybody's picking anything up from this conversation?
Hope so. It evolved from pickleball and now focus more to tennis.
But I do think that, unfortunately, too many people are on the recruiting side. They got to fill their lesson book. And, one player is a magnet, that Bollettieri, who did so many great things, went bankrupt many times because he gave it away for free. Saw some kid hit the ball and go, hey, I want you in my program. And but I do think that's where, coming back to pickleball, is teach people the ready position, teach people a uniturn, teach people how to turn their body. And, one thing, whether it's pickleball or whether it's tennis, is preventive injury. You want to turn, you want to use your larger body parts. You don't want to be playing from your elbow down on any sport, on any racket sport. To play more with your legs, more with your shoulders.
They mentioned in the pickle that it's more risk, so I don't know.
No, I watch people teach on a regular basis, and it's face forward, and it's it's almost like you're dealing cards. That this is how you hit a backhand, and everything is just with the wrist, and it's the flick, and the sport, even though, as we said in the beginning of this podcast, it's been around 65, 67, is we have a lot of instant experts. Growing up in the family I grew up in, growing up in ice hockey, if I started teaching tennis, if I got in tennis and I'm in tennis for 1 week, 1 month, 1 summer, and I started teaching, I would have just been called out on the carpet. Like, you're new to this game. What are you doing charging money? You got to live the sport, just a different mentality. But I don't think that and you take the percentage of, and this is not the fault totally by any means of the tennis teacher. How many tennis teachers have been able to take a beginner and work with them for a long period of time? My son Connor played a match at University of Texas many years ago. So I sent out emails, and we had quite a few people throughout, especially the state of Texas, because there's so many people in Texas that are trained to teach tennis. And we had 2 pads of paper like the one you have in front of you, and it's put your name on this list if you've taught, and put a number next to it, how many kids you've taught over 5 years. And then the next pad of paper was how many kids that you taught for 10 years. And granted, parents are going to move, the dad, the mom are going to get transferred. There's going to be a reason that they leave the program. But again, so many people shop and bop. We always say that, one bad coach is better than 10 different coaches. On the other side, I mean, give the coach some time. The parent's a consumer, and they get in the car. How'd you like the lesson? What do you think of the workout? And it's like they're so green, they're so new to it, and can they? Yeah, they can judge a person's character and this and that, but can they really judge the quality, the productivity of a tennis lesson? But I think 90-10 is good. I think that's. I would say that less than 10% of the people are actually developers. Like, okay, we're going to develop a foundation.
I mean, I guess everybody, to an extent, when they give someone the first lesson, is a developer, but do they prefer to stay in that role, right? Like, if you get a kid that walks in at 8 or 9 years old, are you going to have them for the next 4 or 5 years and taking them up the ladder? So that's the way I was defining it.
Well, if you take a federation job, or then you take, say, a prestigious club, and who's going to be the director of that prestigious club? It's going to be somebody who has a player's background, and they're going to have a salary, and they're going to get a percentage of the assistant pros. They're going to get a percentage of, farm out the work, and, sometimes it's go fish, get as many fishermen teaching as you possibly can, where they're fighting for lessons type thing. So this isn't the case, this isn't necessarily the case everywhere, but many, many places. So what happens with a person who's the director of tennis, if they're still doing some ball hopper work, some people become the director of tennis and they're just a briefcase pro. But they're going to be giving lessons to the kids who can already play. They're going to do it on the show court. They're going to do it on the front court. And they're basically going to just be hitting balls. Let's hit some cross courts, let's hit some down the line, let's play some points. And then that person who's in charge, they're not going court to court. What they really should be doing is not working with the players, but they should be going court to court and working with the teachers. It should be set up that way from a compensation standpoint. So someone who has, granted, I have to hire some young coaches and I can't pay them, these large amount of money's per hour, such and such and such and such, but that you have accountability. Very few places have orientation, and it's like, okay, here's your ball hopper. Go to court 7, and you're going to be teaching this group. And then there's not really common denominators from one court to the next, one pro to the next. But just circle back when we think about the 4 players that we're playing today: Chang, Roddick, Agassi, and McEnroe. They all have backgrounds in the game, and I think I'll just say this, and we can sign off. You can throw in something to write on the bathroom wall here at the end of the podcast. But Agassi is the youngest of 4. It's Rita, Phil, Tammy, and Andre. And Tammy, actually, she played at a college where I taught, so I watched her play every day for a year. And her brother, like Elvis Presley, won a lot of cars, and she had, I remember she had one nice car, then another nice car, and she went on and played at A&M, so she's a really good tennis player. And then later I read where she, not only the battle of winning tennis matches, but the battle of fighting cancer. But she had no similarity with Andre's ball striking. And, you think, Rita, she had a child with Pancho Gonzalez. So, Agassi's brother-in-law is a pretty famous guy. But that connection where, the way we do it systematically, it's like, okay, look at how John McEnroe played and how Patrick McEnroe played. It's not like, okay, it's cookie cutter and, but, actually, if people watch John Roddick hit a ball, and they watched Andy Roddick hit a ball, they could see a lot of similarities. So it's just really interesting. But then what are their backgrounds? Who coached them? But I think I would sign off by saying it was fantastic to watch those 4 famous tennis players play pickleball. It was a fun afternoon. But I do think that we make the mistake in tennis of looking at the very top of the game, the players that, like I said earlier, at the end of the rainbow, and think, okay, this is how we're gonna copy Nadal. Well, if you're 11 years old, copy Nadal when he was 11,
right,
or when he was 10, because you just are going to misinterpret what the top players are doing. But Andres, I appreciate you being a guest today. What do you want to sign off with?
We go back to Medvedev. I thought it was great that they were talking about during the, as I flip back and forth. So I've got to find the story, but they were talking about how, I believe in Russia, they did not believe that he was going to be any sort of a player, and he came back, visited the club, and basically said, "And I told you so." And apparently, if he were to throw the racket, he would have to run. And he figured out a way around that by taking off his shoe and throwing his shoe when he was angry. So the guy's a character. I mean, I really hope tennis doesn't mismanage these characters like I felt like they did last year with Kyrgios. They bring something different to the sport, and a segment of the population are going to be interested. They don't all need to they don't all need to act like Federer and Nadal. They don't all need to be buddy-buddy. Tension is good, and let's have some rivalries.
With Medvedev, he certainly benefited from his family, and that probably was a weak word. That's not easy to say, okay, are we going to get our son to, be based in France and playing? And they have, I think, the best system for match play. I think it's very easy to say in the U.S., we have 5 times as many people as they have in France. But in France, they have 5 times as many players as we have. And they have the system play. And, that's just amazing to me that you get, 2 really good kids at the same high school, and they don't even play each other. It's like let's just play sets, play more and more sets. I mean, that's something to end with as well. But Medvedev, I just love. My volleys are lousy. They're getting a little bit better, but my volleys are lousy. And, I think we tell the kids that all the time is be polite when someone compliments you, but thrive on criticism. And he's very self-critical.
I mean, the rant that he had there with the speed of the court at Indian Wells and going to the bathroom was hilarious. So,
but you said, his serve, toss way out in front. I mean, you just, when players toss over their head, they have to slow the racket down, and that's not what you want to do when you're trying to hit a big serve. But podcast,
Steve, you're gaining strength after the last couple of podcasts. Look at you, you're back to your old self. I mean, I need to regroup and keep going. But no, I appreciate people listening to these podcasts. I mean, I'm told it's hard to believe. I mean, I'm told by people don't shorten the format. And I have done the research. If they're around 3 hours, there's a marathon. Most of them, I think, are around 2. But it would take 1% of your week to listen to one of these podcasts. I'm telling the juniors that, and I try to say it all the time, is that it's not, use my name in third person. It's not Steve Smith stuff, or when Andy started the podcast, it's not Steve and Andy stuff. It's to take a deep dive and just get a deeper and deeper understanding. Like last week, I have on Ry Tarpley, and his story is, he met a lot of great people, helped him in many, many ways, but he didn't get information, nuts and bolts, at 2 + 2, what's it equal, through juniors or through college. And it's never too late. But I think that's, the term TIP, T-I-P, total intense practice. And I do think that, less is more in that sense, where it's like, no, we are doing this on the podcast, yap. But, just take that pearl of wisdom and hopefully these podcasts are making people a better tennis parent, better tennis player, better tennis teacher.
But Andres, thank you very much. Yvonne puts all this together. Yvonne, thank you very much. Adios, amigos. We'll see you on the next one.